or worse. All right, now we can get to wiring stuff, right? So those are your 3 bonus areas that I normally don't cover in class, but I figure because we are now in this pickle that we're in, give you some more stuff for your money. All right, so let's talk about wiring. Well, there's a reason why we use what we do for conductors, right? Our wires are made of what they are. You look inside, and they're copper most of the time. Sometimes they're silver inside. Sometimes they're gold. Not gold, copper. But look at the conductivity of the different components. Silver is the best. This is why you find silver solder, and you find silver paste, and you find all these electronic components to make connections, and they are done with silver, right? We have copper, which is number 2, right? So silver is the best, copper is the second best, gold is the third best. Obviously, we use copper because you try to ever bend silver, right? It's pliable, but it will break, as will gold, right? Gold is soft, and that will go too. But copper, you can bend back and forth, and naturally it's cheap, right? We got aluminum, which is a little worse. Tungsten, that's a little bit worse. Zinc, brass, platinum, iron, nickel, tin, steel, and lead, right? All of these things will conduct electricity, but you can see that there are things that are better than others. When it comes to our wire, we have 2 different sizes, and you got introduced to them with wiring diagrams, right? When they are American wire gauge, which is more domestic standard type of stuff, we get whole numbers, right? We get 20, 18, 16, 14, 12 gauge, 10 gauge. The funny part is the higher the number, the smaller the wire, right? The lower the number, the bigger the wire. So when we're talking 00 gauge, it's a giant wire. When we go to 0, 1, 2, these are battery cables. We go 3, 4, 5, right? We're talking about heavier power cables and stuff like that. We start going into 10 gauge, and now we have things that are heavier duty, like for lighting, if we're adding lighting. And as we go through, our normal stuff will be somewhere around between 16 and 18 gauge, and modern cars are now 22 gauge. And that's why Cadillac CTS wires melt in the headlights, because they're so narrow. What happens when we get high resistance, right? And if we're running more amperage than a wire can handle, it's exactly that, resistance. So what do? We get heat. And when we get heat, we get meltage. And that's why a lot of lighting systems nowadays fail. Why do we go with lighter, smaller gauge wire? Because it weighs less. And if it weighs less, gas mileage is better. So you can see this tug over EPA stuff and durability, right? So when we're talking about American wire gauge, we get numbers like this. Higher number, smaller wire, lower number, bigger. So when you are looking at wiring diagrams and you see 0.5 on a diagram going to a radio, it's obviously not going to be bigger than a battery cable, so it must be metric, right? So keep your head straight when you look at those numbers, right? So if we go to metric, right, metric wire is done with decimals, right? 0.5, 0.8, 1.0. Well, that's millimeters squared, right? The wire's round and the conductor inside is round. Therefore, it's got to be squared because it's 2 directions, right? So naturally in metric, smaller number, smaller wire. Bigger number, 52 millimeters squared. It's a pretty fat wire. Now look at that compared to American wire gauge, right? 52 millimeters squared is equivalent to 0 gauge, which is bigger than battery cables, right? Battery cables are usually 2, right? You go to 20 gauge, there's your 0.5. And now you see why you see 0.5 and 0.8 where they stand as far as wires go. Now, that doesn't mean you need to buy metric wires. They're equivalent. So you can buy American wire gauge wire, which are easier to buy, and you can fix a 0.5 millimeter wire with 20 gauge wire, right? This is a good chart to go, but you can look at wire and you can tell. You hold them in your hand and you can tell if they're the same size wire or not, right? So here we got what happens. So we talked about what happens when we have lengths of wire, right? Voltage drop starts happening because of resistance. So you'll see that all depending on the voltage that's applied, as we go longer, we need to increase the size of the wire to be able to do away with the resistance, to carry that amperage and that voltage to the end. So if we're running 20, well, we'll sit down. So 12 volts, if we're running 20 amps, right, you can see we start at 18 gauge up to 5 feet, but now we got to step it up to 16 gauge. That brings us to 10 feet. And then we got to go thicker with the wire. Once we're 15 feet, we're at 14 gauge, 20 feet, we're at 12, and 10 when we get to 25 feet. So that means that wire has to be thicker all the way to the beginning, if we know that's the stretch we're doing. So if we're running wires within a dashboard and we're going from the fuse box to the radio, there's no distance there. It doesn't matter. But if we're running a wire all the way to the trunk for amps that you have in the back, we need bigger wire, right? And if you look here and you see once you go 200 amps, right, look at this, the size wire, 2 gauge, right? Giant wire once you're going 25 feet. Right? So think about that as you're looking at the circuits you are. All right. So you'll see these on cars all over the place. You'll see ground straps, right? And what ground straps are braided. They're braided ground straps. You'll see them tie from the firewall to the hood, from the strut tower to the engine, all over the place. And what they're for is to, what do we get when we have a collapse of magnetic fields, right? We get AC voltage. AC voltage wreaks havoc on our stereo speakers and whatnot. I mean, nothing's worse than setting your car up with a big amp in the back and have engine noise come through. So the braided ground straps reduce the radio interference because the crossing of the wires kill the AC voltage, right? So if you find these ground straps on a car, they need to be there. If you see one broken, fix it, right? That's the purpose of them. And notice that they are not insulated. They are bare, right? That's the way ground straps are, right? So once we take it, we weave the wires over each other, the AC voltage gets kiboshed. Right, so you can see battery cables, right? 4 gauge or larger wire is used for battery and starter cables. It's because they are carrying a lot of amperage, right? You had 141, and you saw the kind of amperage that a starter takes, right? Starter could take 300 cranking amps. We need to be able to carry that load when that time comes, and those battery cables end up being a lot larger. Now notice this stuff over here, right? This is conduit called split loom, right? That's just ways to, first of all, make it look pretty, but second, to make sure the wire doesn't chafe on its surroundings. Just gives an extra barrier. So whenever I do any work, I always coat the wires in that under engine compartment, because then you don't see a bright red wire that doesn't belong anyplace. Right? So if a car had it, you want to put it back. It was there for a reason. If you're adding wire to it, you know, pick up some of this stuff and coat it, and no one will ever know you put it in there. So when you had brakes, right, you learned about wheel speed sensors. And one of the things you learned about them, and you even did it in class, is that it's a magnetic sensor. And that magnetic sensor makes AC voltage as the tone wheel wraps around as you spin the wheel, and it gets a faster and faster wheel speed. That creates a circumstance where your stereos could start sounding terrible. Not to mention that AC voltage getting involved in some other things. You know, if it can affect speakers, it can affect other electronic components. So anytime you see wheel speed sensors in a car and you look at a diagram, you will see them indicated on the diagram as a twisted pair, and you'll see the wires cross over each other all the way through the diagram. The same way a ground strap kills AC voltage, so does that, right? So if you look, it says twisted pair is used to transmit low voltage signals using two wires twisted together. Electromagnetic interference can cause voltage in a wire. Twisting the two signals cancels out this voltage. Twisted pair, that means that two wires have at least 9 turns per foot, 2 turns per meter. And a rule of thumb is a twisted pair should have 1 twist per inch of length, right? So that's where they're doing it. You know, one way that it's really easy to twist the pair? Stick them in an electric drill and hold on the other end and zing, and you got them all twisted, right? Real easy way to do it.